Welcome to Insane HOA Madness. I brought a binder, and she brought excuses. Do not point at me like that. Ann Taylor, the social committee chair for the Fairview Estates Association, was jabbing her finger at my chest in the middle of the community mailbox cluster, waving a single sheet of paper in her other hand. She screamed that my signature was missing, and she was the one who had the page. I could see my signature right there at the bottom, bold as day, and I told her so. She screamed louder, said the copy she had was the official one, and mine was fraudulent. That was when I knew something was very wrong. I work as a landscape irrigation tech in Duluth, Minnesota. I spend most of my days fixing sprinkler lines, pressure regulators, and valve boxes for commercial properties and a few residential accounts. The HOA claims I owe a re-inspection fee for an inspection that never happened. I never requested a re-inspection. I never failed an initial inspection. There was no violation on record until 3 days ago when Ann showed up at my door with a notice that had a date from 6 weeks back. The notice said I missed a hearing. I was never notified of a hearing. The stakes are simple. I cannot afford to take time off for surprise hearings and forced meetings. I work contract gigs that pay by the job, and if I miss an install window, I lose the contract. If the HOA keeps stacking fees and threatening liens, I will have to pay thousands just to make them go away, and that is not an option. Ann tapped a metal key fob on the edge of the mailbox to demand silence. She does that. Every time someone tries to interrupt her, she taps that fob like a gavel. You can be mad, or you can be compliant, she said, her voice dripping with smugness. We can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works. I asked for the meeting minutes that authorized the reinspection policy. She said the minutes were available on the portal. I checked the portal that morning. The minutes for the last 6 months were not there. When I pointed that out, she said the portal was being updated and I would have to submit a formal records request in writing. I asked how long that would take. She said 30 days, maybe longer, and there would be copy fees. I told her I would file the request. She smiled and said the fees were due immediately, and if I did not pay within 10 business days, they would add late charges. I walked back to my truck, my mind already racing. This was not the first time the Fairview Estates Association had pulled something like this. 2 years ago, a neighbor named Greg got hit with a landscaping violation for having a dead bush in his front yard. The notice said he had 14 days to remove it. He removed it the next day and submitted photographic proof. A week later, the HOA sent him a second notice saying he missed the deadline and owed a compliance fee. When he showed up at the meeting with his timestamped photos, the board said the photos did not show the property line clearly enough and refused to reverse the fee. Greg paid it to avoid a lien. A year later, he moved out. That case never made sense. The photos were clear. The timeline was documented. But the HOA insisted the record showed otherwise, and no one had the time or money to fight it in court. Now I was getting the same treatment, and I had a feeling the two cases were connected. I needed to see the original complaint. The notice Ann handed me did not list a complainant, just a vague reference to a neighborhood standards inspection. That was unusual. Most HOA complaints come from neighbors, and the rules require the board to log the source. If there was no complainant, then someone on the board initiated it, and that meant selective enforcement. I pulled up the county property records on my phone and checked the HOA management contract. The contract listed the same management company Greg had dealt with, and the signing date was 4 years ago. That was odd because HOA management contracts usually renew every 2 years. I made a note to dig into that later. The next morning, I drove to the Fairview Estates Association office, a small converted house on the edge of the neighborhood. The office was only open 3 days a week, and Ann was usually there on Wednesdays. I parked in the tiny lot and walked up to the front door. A laminated sign on the door said office hours were by appointment only. I knocked anyway, no answer. I tried the handle. Locked. I pulled out my phone and called the main HOA number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I left a message asking for a copy of the complaint and the meeting minutes that authorized the reinspection policy. I also asked for the name of the inspector who supposedly came to my property. I kept my tone calm and professional. I knew Ann would listen to the voicemail, and I wanted her to know I was not going away. That afternoon, a truck pulled up to my house. The logo on the door said Evergreen Compliance Services. A man in a polo shirt and khakis got out, holding a clipboard. He walked up to my porch and knocked. I opened the door. He introduced himself as Kyle and said he was here to verify compliance with HOA landscaping standards. I asked if he had been the one who filed the original complaint. He said no, he was just here to follow up. I asked who sent him. He said the HOA office requested the visit. I asked if he had a copy of the original violation notice. He said no, that would be with the HOA. I asked when he was here 6 weeks ago for the initial inspection. He looked confused and checked his clipboard. He said this was his first visit to my address. I felt a cold spike of anger in my chest. There was no initial inspection. The whole thing was fabricated. I asked Kyle if he could put that in writing. He hesitated, then said he could not comment on HOA procedures, but he could confirm this was his first visit. I asked if I could record him saying that. He shrugged and said sure. I pulled out my phone, opened the voice recorder, and asked him again. He repeated that this was his first visit to my address and he had no record of a prior inspection. I thanked him and asked if he could email me a copy of his visit log for today. He said he would send it to the HOA and they would forward it to me. I did not trust that, but I thanked him anyway. He walked back to his truck and left. I had my first piece of evidence. The inspection that supposedly happened 6 weeks ago never happened. That evening, I sat down at my kitchen table with a notebook and started building a timeline. The notice Ann gave me was dated 6 weeks ago, but I only received it 3 days ago. That meant it was either lost in the mail, which seemed unlikely given that all my other mail arrived on time, or it was backdated. If it was backdated, that was fraud. I checked my mailbox log. I keep a simple log of when I get mail because I had issues with missing packages a year ago. The log showed no HOA notice in the 6 weeks leading up to 3 days ago. The notice arrived exactly when Ann said it did, 3 days ago, but the date on the notice was 6 weeks old. That was proof of backdating. I pulled up the HOA portal on my laptop and tried to log in. The portal accepted my username and password, but when I clicked on meeting minutes, the page returned an error. I refreshed. Same error. I tried a different browser. Same error. I cleared my cache and tried again. This time the page loaded, but the minutes section was empty. No files, no links, no archive. I took a screenshot. Then I opened the contact page and sent an email to the HOA board asking for access to the minutes and requesting an explanation for the portal error. I copied Ann on the email. I knew she would see it and know I was building a case. The next day I got a response. It was not from Ann. It was from the HOA management company, a canned reply that said records requests must be submitted in writing with payment for copy fees, and processing could take up to 30 days. The email did not address the portal error. I replied asking if the portal was down for everyone or just me. No response. I forwarded the email chain to a neighbor I knew from the community Facebook group, a woman named Lisa, who had been vocal about HOA transparency issues in the past. I asked if her portal access was working. She replied 20 minutes later and said her portal was fine. She could see all the minutes going back 2 years. That confirmed it. My access was being blocked. I called the management company directly. A receptionist answered and transferred me to a property manager named Denise. I explained the situation. Denise put me on hold for 3 minutes, then came back and said there was a note on my account that records access was restricted pending resolution of an outstanding compliance issue. I asked who placed the note. She said it came from the board. I asked which board member. She said she could not disclose that. I asked if restricting records access was a standard procedure. She hesitated, then said it was not standard, but it was within the board's discretion. I asked if I could appeal. She said I could submit a written appeal to the board, and they would review it at the next meeting. The next meeting was 3 weeks away. That was the time pressure. I had a notary appointment booked in 10 days to file sworn statements for a separate contract dispute, and if I missed that window, it would delay everything by weeks. I could not afford to wait 3 weeks for the HOA to maybe reverse a records restriction. I decided to go around the board. I remembered Greg, the neighbor who moved out after the landscaping fee debacle. I still had his contact info from the Facebook group. I sent him a message asking if he still had any of the paperwork from his case. He replied an hour later. He said he kept everything and would be happy to share it. He lived 2 towns over now, but he could scan the documents and email them. I gave him my email and waited. The files came through that night. There were photos, time-stamped and geotagged, showing the dead bush removal. There was a copy of his original violation notice, dated with a 2-week compliance window. There was a copy of his submission email to the HOA with the photos attached, sent within 24 hours of the notice. And there was a copy of the second notice, claiming he missed the deadline, dated exactly 2 weeks and 1 day after the original notice. But the email timestamp on his submission was clear. He sent it the day after the first notice. The second notice was fabricated. I compared the 2 notices. The formatting was identical. Same font, same spacing, same signature block. But the signature on the second notice looked slightly different. The ink was darker, the pen pressure uneven. I pulled up a high-resolution scan and zoomed in. The signature on the second notice was not a scan of a real signature. It was a digital paste job. Someone had copied the signature from the first notice and pasted it onto the second notice, but they did not match the resolution, so it looked slightly off. That was forgery. I took screenshots and added them to my evidence folder. Now I had 2 cases with the same pattern: backdated notices, fabricated deadlines, and forged signatures. The common link was Ann Taylor. She was on the board during Greg's case, and she was the one who delivered my notice. I needed to find out if there were other cases. I went back to the Facebook group and posted a vague question asking if anyone else had issues with HOA notices or surprise fees in the last 2 years. I did not mention Ann by name. Within an hour, I had 5 replies. 2 people said they had been hit with fees that did not match the notice dates. One person said they tried to appeal and the portal deleted their submission. Another person said they were told the hearing minutes were lost and could not be recovered. The 5th person said they just paid the fee because fighting it was not worth the stress. Every one of them mentioned Ann as the person who delivered the notice or handled the appeal. I reached out to each of them privately and asked if they would be willing to share their paperwork. 3 of them said yes. 1 said they threw everything away. 1 did not respond. The 3 who agreed sent me scans over the next 2 days. I compiled everything into a single folder and started cross-referencing dates, signatures, and notice formatting. The pattern was undeniable. Every notice had the same formatting quirks. Every appeal was either ignored or deleted from the portal. Every fee was tied to a deadline that did not match the actual timeline, and every case involved Ann in some capacity, either as the person who delivered the notice, the person who handled the appeal, or the person who represented the board at the hearing. I also found something else. One of the neighbors, a guy named Tom, included a screenshot of the portal audit log from when his appeal was deleted. The log showed his appeal was opened by an account with admin access, then deleted 3 minutes later. The account name was partially visible in the screenshot. It was not Tom's account. It was an admin account, and the username started with AT. Ann Taylor. She had deleted his appeal herself. That was when I knew I had her. The question was how to use it. I could not just email the board with a PDF of evidence and hope they would act. Ann was on the board. She had allies. If I tipped my hand too early, she would have time to cover her tracks or discredit me. I needed to force a public confrontation where she could not control the narrative. I needed a meeting, but not an HOA meeting. Those were too easy to manipulate. I needed a setting where witnesses were present and the pressure was on her to respond in real time. I thought about the hardware store parking lot. Ann did a lot of her HOA business there because it was central and she could catch people on their way in or out. If I could get her to confront me there, in public, I could record the whole thing and use it as evidence. But I needed bait. I needed her to think I was about to do something that would force her hand. I drafted an email to the board copying Ann and said I was filing a formal complaint with the county about fraudulent HOA notices and I had evidence of forgery and records tampering. I did not attach the evidence. I just said I had it and I would be presenting it to the county clerk the following week. I also said I was requesting an emergency board meeting to address the complaint before I filed with the county. I knew Ann would panic. If the county started investigating, the whole scheme would unravel, and she would be exposed. She would have to confront me before I could file. I sent the email and waited. The response came 2 hours later. It was not an email. It was a knock on my door. Anne was standing on my porch with a clipboard and a printed copy of my email. Her face was red, her mouth a tight line. She did not wait for me to speak. She started yelling immediately, saying I was making false accusations and that filing a complaint with the county was harassment. I stayed calm and asked if she wanted to discuss it inside. She said no, we could discuss it right here. I said fine, but I was going to record the conversation. I pulled out my phone and started the voice recorder. She said I could not record her without permission. I said Minnesota is a one-party consent state, and I was giving myself permission. She hesitated, then said she did not care. She had nothing to hide. That was a lie, and I knew it, but I let her keep talking. She said the reinspection fee was legitimate and the notice was sent on time. I asked if she could show me the proof of mailing. She said the HOA did not keep mailing receipts. I asked if there was a log of when notices were printed. She said there was not. I asked who signed the notice. She said it was signed by the board president, which was her. I asked if she had signed it digitally or by hand. She hesitated, then said by hand. I asked if I could see the original. She said the original was filed with the management company. I asked if I could request a copy. She said I could submit a records request, but it would take 30 days and there would be fees. I asked why I had to pay fees to see a document that was supposedly about my own property. She did not have an answer for that. She just repeated the policy. Then I asked about Greg's case. Her face changed. The smugness drained, and for a second I saw panic. She said Greg's case was closed and not relevant. I said it was relevant because the same pattern was happening again. I said I had copies of Greg's paperwork, including the forged second notice, and I had compared the signatures. Her voice went up an octave. She said Greg was a liar and his case was resolved. I asked if the board had ever investigated the signature mismatch. She said there was no mismatch. I said I had a forensic comparison. That was a bluff, but it worked. She stammered and said she would have to check with the board attorney. I asked if the board attorney was aware of the forgery allegations. She said there were no forgery allegations until I made them up. I said I had documentation and I would be happy to share it with the board attorney, the county clerk, and anyone else who wanted to see it. She turned and walked off my porch without another word. If this story is making your blood boil, hit that like button and subscribe, because the payback is coming and you do not want to miss it. That night, I got a call from Denise at the management company. She said the board had decided to schedule an emergency meeting and I was invited to present my complaint. The meeting would be in 3 days, held at the community center. I asked if the meeting would be recorded. She said the board did not record meetings, but I was welcome to take notes. I said I would bring my own recording equipment. She paused, then said board policy prohibited unauthorized recordings. I said I would check the bylaws on that. She said the bylaws were available on the portal. I said my portal access was still restricted. She said she would look into that and hung up. I knew she would not look into it. The restriction was deliberate, and it would stay in place until I forced it to be lifted. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I printed every piece of evidence I had collected. Greg's notices, Tom's portal log screenshot, the forensic comparison of the signatures, the timeline showing the backdated notice, the email from Kyle confirming there was no prior inspection, and the records request denials. I organized everything into a tabbed binder with labeled sections. I also prepared a short presentation script. I wanted to keep it tight and factual. No emotional appeals, just evidence and questions. I practiced the presentation twice, timing it to under 10 minutes. If Anne tried to interrupt, I wanted to be able to pivot and keep the focus on the facts. The night before the meeting, I got a message from Lisa, the neighbor from the Facebook group. She said she heard about the meeting and she wanted to attend as a witness. I said she was welcome to come, but I warned her it might get ugly. She said she did not care, she was tired of the board playing favorites, and if I had evidence, she wanted to see it. I thanked her and said I would save her a seat. Then I got another message, this time from a landscaping contractor named Mike who worked in the neighborhood. He said he had been dealing with Fairview Estates for years, and he had his own issues with Anne. He said she would call him to verify compliance on random properties, always properties where the owner had crossed her somehow. He said he was not supposed to tell anyone, but he thought I should know. I asked if he would be willing to testify at the meeting. He said he could not. He had contracts with other HOAs and he could not afford to burn bridges. But he could send me an email summarizing what he knew. I said that would be enough. The email came through an hour later, and I printed it and added it to the binder. The morning of the meeting, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I knew this was going to be a fight. Anne had 3 days to prepare her defense, and she would come in swinging. I grabbed the binder, my phone, a small digital recorder as a backup, and a bottle of water. I left early and drove to the community center. The parking lot was already half full. I recognized a few cars from the neighborhood. I parked, grabbed my gear, and walked inside. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front for the board and rows of folding chairs facing it. Anne was already there, sitting at the center of the table with 2 other board members I did not recognize. She had her stack of pre-filled forms in front of her and her metal key fob in her hand. She saw me walk in, and her face went hard. I took a seat in the front row and set the binder on my lap. Lisa walked in a few minutes later and sat next to me. A few other neighbors trickled in, including Tom, the guy whose appeal was deleted. The board called the meeting to order at exactly 7. Anne tapped her key fob on the table to get everyone's attention. She said the meeting was being held to address a complaint filed by a resident, which was me, and the board would hear the complaint and respond. She said the board had reviewed the matter in advance and had prepared a response. I raised my hand. She ignored me. I raised my hand higher. She tapped the key fob again and said I would have my turn to speak after the board presented their findings. I said the complaint was mine and I should present first. She said board policy was to present findings first. I asked which policy. She did not answer. She just moved on and started reading from a prepared statement. The statement said the reinspection fee was valid, the notice was sent on time, and all procedures were followed in accordance with HOA rules. She said I had refused to cooperate with the compliance officer, which was Kyle, and my complaint was baseless and motivated by a desire to avoid paying legitimate fees. She said the board had investigated the matter thoroughly and found no evidence of wrongdoing. She said if I continued to make false accusations, the board would consider further action, including legal remedies. Then she looked at me and said I could respond if I had anything factual to add. The tone was condescending, dismissive. She thought she had already won. I stood up, walked to the front of the room, and set the binder on the table in front of her. I opened it to the first tab and said I had evidence that the notice was backdated, the inspection never happened, and the appeal process was sabotaged. I slid the timeline across the table so everyone could see it. I pointed to the date on the notice Anne gave me, then pointed to the date in my mailbox log. I said the notice arrived 3 days ago, but it was dated 6 weeks ago, and I had no record of receiving it in the interim. Anne said the mail was not the HOA's responsibility. I said that was fine, but the discrepancy was still evidence of backdating. I flipped to the next tab and showed the email from Kyle confirming this was his first visit to my property. I said the original complaint claimed there was a prior inspection, but Kyle confirmed there was not. Anne said Kyle was mistaken. I said I had a recording of him saying it. She demanded to hear the recording. I pulled out my phone and played it. Kyle's voice was clear. First visit, no prior inspection. The room was dead silent. I flipped to the next tab and showed Greg's case. I laid out the 2 notices side by side and pointed to the signature mismatch. I said the second notice was forged. Anne slammed her hand on the table and said that was a serious accusation, and I had no proof. I said the proof was in the resolution difference, and if the board wanted, I could send the files to a forensic analyst. She said the board did not have budget for that. I said that was convenient. Then I flipped to the final tab and showed Tom's portal log screenshot. I pointed to the admin account that deleted his appeal. I said the account belonged to someone with the initials AT, and there was only one person on the board with those initials. Anne's face went white. She said the log was fake. Tom stood up from the back of the room and said it was not fake. He took the screenshot himself, and he still had the email confirmation showing his appeal was submitted. Anne said the portal had a glitch. I said that was a convenient glitch that only seemed to affect people who disagreed with the board. One of the other board members, an older man named Carl, leaned forward and asked to see the binder. I handed it to him. He flipped through the tabs slowly, reading each section. His face got harder with every page. He looked at Anne and asked if she had seen any of this before the meeting. She said she had not. He asked why not. She said the complaint was just filed, and she did not have time to review everything. Carl said the complaint was filed 3 days ago, and the meeting was scheduled specifically to address it, so there should have been time. Anne did not answer. Carl closed the binder and said he wanted an independent audit of the notice process and the portal access logs. Anne said that was not necessary. Carl said it was absolutely necessary, and if Anne had a problem with it, she could resign from the board. The room erupted. Neighbors started talking over each other, some supporting Carl, some defending Anne. Anne tapped her key fob on the table over and over, trying to restore order, but no one was listening. Lisa stood up and said she had been watching the HOA play favorites for years, and this was the proof everyone needed. She said the board needed to reverse every fee tied to a backdated notice and refund everyone who paid. Another neighbor, a woman I did not recognize, said she paid a fee last year under the same circumstances and she wanted her money back. Tom said he wanted his appeal reinstated and the fee reversed. Anne was shouting now, saying everyone needed to calm down and follow procedure, but her voice was shaking. Carl called for a vote to authorize an independent audit. The other board member, a quiet woman named Ellen, said she seconded the motion. The vote was 3-1, with Anne voting against. The motion passed. Anne stood up, grabbed her forms, and said she was not going to sit here and be accused of crimes she did not commit. She said the audit would prove her right, and everyone in the room owed her an apology. Then she walked out. The key fob fell from her hand and clattered on the floor. No one picked it up. The meeting broke up a few minutes later. Carl said the audit would take about 2 weeks, and the results would be posted on the portal and mailed to every resident. He also said the board would freeze all pending fees and hearings until the audit was complete. I thanked him and shook his hand. Lisa hugged me and said I was a hero. Tom said he was going to file his own complaint with the county now that the board had acknowledged there was a problem. I told him to wait for the audit results so he would have official documentation to back it up. He agreed. I walked back to my truck, feeling the adrenaline start to fade. I had done it. I had forced the board to act, and I had done it on the record in front of witnesses. But I knew it was not over. Anne was not going to take this quietly. She was going to fight back, and I needed to be ready. I pulled out my phone and checked my email. There was a message from Denise at the management company. The subject line said, "Portal access restored." I opened it. My portal access was back. I logged in and pulled up the meeting minutes archive. The last 6 months of minutes were there now, including the minutes from the meeting that supposedly authorized the reinspection policy. I opened the file and started reading. The policy was not there. There was no mention of reinspection fees anywhere in the minutes. The policy Anne cited did not exist. I took a screenshot and added it to my evidence folder. Then I scrolled back further, looking for anything else that might be relevant. I found a note in the minutes from 2 years ago, right around the time of Greg's case. The note said the board had approved a new compliance vendor contract with Evergreen Compliance Services, the same company Kyle worked for. The contract was signed by Anne and approved without a vote. That was a procedural violation. HOA bylaws required a board vote for any contract over a certain amount, and vendor contracts definitely qualified. If Anne signed the contract without a vote, that was another layer of misconduct. I saved the minutes file and made a note to include it in the audit request. The next day, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered. It was Anne. Her voice was tight and controlled. She said we needed to talk, and it needed to be in person. I asked what it was about. She said it was about the audit, and she wanted to clarify some things before the auditor got involved. I said I was happy to talk, but I wanted a witness present. She said that was not necessary. I said it was non-negotiable. She hung up. 10 minutes later, I got a text from her. It said, "Hardware store parking lot, 4 p.m. Come alone or do not come at all." I did not respond. I forwarded the text to Lisa and Carl and said if I did not check in by 4:30, they should assume something went wrong. I showed up at the hardware store at 3:55. Anne was already there, standing next to her car with her arms crossed. She saw me pull in and walked over before I could get out of the truck. I rolled down the window. She leaned in and said, "You do not know what you are doing." I said I knew exactly what I was doing. She said the audit was going to cost the HOA thousands of dollars, and if it found nothing, I would be liable for the cost. I said that was not how audits worked, and if she was confident the audit would find nothing, she should have no problem with it moving forward. She said I was making this personal, and it did not have to be. I said she made it personal when she backdated my notice and blocked my records access. She said she did not backdate anything, and my records access was restored, so I had nothing to complain about. I said the access was only restored after I threatened to file with the county, and that was retaliation, not compliance. Her face went red. She said I was twisting everything to make her look bad. I said I did not have to twist anything. The evidence spoke for itself. She said the evidence was circumstantial and would not hold up in court. I said we were not in court, we were in an HOA meeting, and the board had already voted to move forward with the audit, so her opinion did not matter. She stepped back from the truck and pulled out her phone. She said she was going to call her attorney and have him file a cease and desist. I said she was welcome to do that, but it would not stop the audit, and it would not erase the evidence. She started dialing. Then she stopped and looked at me. "You walked away on purpose, did you not?" I stayed silent. She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You wanted me to follow and say more. You wanted me to incriminate myself." I said I did not need to trick her into incriminating herself. She did that all on her own. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder app. I said, "I have been recording this entire conversation, and you just admitted you knew I was documenting your behavior, which means you knew what you were doing was wrong, and you did it anyway." Her face went from red to white. She said that recording was illegal. I said Minnesota is a one-party consent state, and I already told you I was recording at my house, so you were on notice. She said I did not tell her I was recording right now. I said I just did. She started to say something else, then stopped. She turned and walked back to her car. She got in, slammed the door, and drove off without another word. I sat in the truck for a minute, letting the adrenaline settle. Then I checked my phone. The recording was clean. I had her voice, her admission that she knew I was documenting her behavior, and her threat to call an attorney. I saved the file and uploaded it to my cloud storage. Then I texted Lisa and Carl and said the meeting was over and I was fine. Lisa replied immediately and asked what happened. I said I would fill her in later. 2 weeks later, the audit results came back. The report was 30 pages long and detailed every procedural violation the board had committed in the last 3 years. The findings included backdated notices, unauthorized vendor contracts, deleted portal appeals, and selective enforcement of compliance rules. The report also found that Ann had signed multiple notices without board approval and had altered meeting minutes to remove references to disputes. The auditor recommended a full refund of all fees tied to backdated notices, a policy change requiring independent oversight of the compliance process, and the removal of Ann from the board. The report was posted on the portal and mailed to every resident. The board held an emergency meeting the following week. Carl opened the meeting by reading a summary of the audit findings. Then he introduced a motion to remove Ann from the board and appoint an interim social committee chair. The motion passed unanimously. Ann was not present. Carl also introduced a motion to implement a meeting vote that requires evidence standards before any fine can be issued. The motion passed. Then he introduced a motion to refund all fees tied to backdated notices, a total of over $40,000 across the neighborhood. The motion passed. The minutes record the reversal and the reason. The final piece came a week later. Ann was required to attend a board meeting and issue a formal apology to the residents who had been affected by the backdated notices. She showed up, read a prepared statement, and left immediately after. Karen is forced to apologize on the record in front of the room. It was brief, stiff, and completely insincere, but it was on the record, and that was what mattered. Lisa recorded the whole thing on her phone and posted it to the Facebook group. The comment section exploded. People who had left the neighborhood years ago came back to watch the video. Greg sent me a message saying he wished he had been there to see it in person. The karma moment came a month later. The new compliance policy required the board to cite the specific rule section before issuing any fine. Anne, who had moved to an advisory role after being removed from the board, tried to challenge a neighbor's fence height by citing a rule that she claimed was in the covenants. Karen confidently reads the wrong rule section out loud. The neighbor asked her to read the section number. Anne read it. The section she cited was about mailbox placement, not fences. The room burst into laughter. Carl asked if she wanted to correct herself. She did not. She just gathered her papers and walked out. She resigned from the advisory role 2 days later. The HOA hired a new management company and implemented quarterly audits to prevent future abuse. The compliance vendor contract with Evergreen Compliance Services was terminated and replaced with a vendor that required documented complaints before any site visit. Kyle, the compliance officer, sent me an email thanking me for exposing the scheme. He said he had been uncomfortable with the way Anne handled things, but did not know how to push back without losing the contract. He said the new vendor was a lot more transparent, and he was glad to be working under a better system. I got my refund 2 months later, along with a letter from the board apologizing for the procedural failures and confirming that my account was clear. I framed the letter and hung it in my garage, right next to my work schedule board. Every time I see it, I remember that the system can be beaten if you are willing to fight, document everything, and refuse to back down. The neighborhood is quieter now. People are not afraid to push back when the board oversteps, and the board is a lot more careful about following procedure. Anne moved out of Fairview Estates 6 months after the audit. I heard she joined another HOA board in a different town, but I do not know if that is true, and I do not care. She is not my problem anymore. Take care, and thanks for watching.